Hello and welcome back to F1 Isn't Real. I am your host, Ben Wevel, who spent his past week planning my resignation from the Williams financial department, and I'm joined this week by Mr. V1 himself, Amesh, for our groggy-eyed recap of the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix. Amesh, we've had a little Easter hiatus, but it's been quite a week, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a good break. Happy to get back into F1 as always. Um, this weekend has been somewhat eventful, but at the same time, it has been a bit lacking in some departments, especially for a Japanese Grand Prix. But yeah, I think there's a decent amount to dig deep into this weekend.
For sure there is, for sure there is. Let's, on the subject of this weekend, let's get down to business. Let's get into it. And first off, unfortunately, as I alluded to in the intro, we are talking about Williams Racing, who may be in a bit of a spot of bother at the moment. We saw Logan Sargent go off at the Dunlop curve in FP1. Obviously, a driver error there. He got on the grass, it was a bit damp, somewhat understandable, but still a mistake. Huge amount of damage, and probably was a big setback for Williams this weekend. And then another mistake, Ricardo Albon tangling at turn three. First off, Amish, before we get into what this could mean for Williams, is this an opening lap incident, or was there a huge driver error that led to this huge crash?
Well, in terms of the Logan Sargent event in FP1, I think that might be I think that's his fault. If you look at the replays, he put his wheel in the grass, and then it's inevitable that a crash is going to happen, especially at a track like Suzuka. Um, for Alex Albon, I'd like to say that's just a racing incident. Turn one and two at Suzuka is really difficult for lap one. So taking it uh taking it like that, it's not good news for Williams. The last two weekends have been quite disappointing and damaging to their finance and research and development, because it's been two weekends where they've had a ton of DNFs and a ton of crashes, which has really set them back.
Ton
And
of
it's
DNFs,
quite
yeah,
important. Yeah,
loads of DNFs,
yeah.
crashes, bad publicity, just generally the vibe around Williams is really slipping from their perception last year, where you have this grassroots team, of course, who have been through almost every stage a Formula One team can be in, and they really seemed back on the up into maybe the lower midfield. But now we've sort of seen them this season, 0 points so far on the board. What is Williams's greatest concern at this point in the season?
Um, I'm going to be brutal and say it's Logan Sargent.
Mm.
I don't like putting it all on one driver, but when it comes to a situation like this, we've seen it before with Nicholas Latifi and in other teams as well, not to mention Lance Stroll, uh, which is still going. But I think Logan Sargent is definitely the liability here in the team, even though the Williams doesn't have a single point on the board yet. I think looking at uh, race results past P10, Alex Albon is definitely carrying the team, even though it has been a rough couple of weeks for the team and Alex Albon himself. I think he's definitely proven that he can perform. So that's why I'm putting less blame on him and more blame on Logan Sargent. It's the sad truth, but I think that's how I feel about this whole situation.
Is Logan Sargent's position in jeopardy, do you think? Um, Not just for next season, but for possibly mid-season. How likely is it, do you think, that he's going to make it until the United States Grand Prix?
I think it's unlikely, Ben. I think I'm quite confused about what Williams were doing in between the end of last year and the beginning of this year, because there was some doubts about Logan Sargent at the end of last year. They signed him, and immediately he's just been not performing as to what they expected him to be. And I guess you could say it's a mistake, and they just wanted to have that a little extra hope with Sargent. But at the same time, in F1, you can't afford to take these risks when your probability is quite low, given a poor track record. I think I'm sort of disappointed by the Williams team for doing this. I think they could have opened up the seat into someone a bit more promising or with a bit more potential. So yeah, I think they're just in the mud at the moment.
Do you think Williams needs, obviously we saw with Haas, for example, switching it over to sort of that side of things, right? We saw with Haas, they were reliant for a very long time, post the Romain Grosjean incident of 2020, on drivers who would bring in, an influx of money and hopefully better performances. Do you think Williams is reliant on the sort of source that Logan Sargent is as someone who could break them into the ever expanding American market in Formula One? Do you think they're reliant on that, and that's possibly why he's been given a second chance? And what do you think it would take to break that reliance? Because of course, we saw with Nicholas Latifi, 3 years of poor performances, and that was his lot. But Logan Sargent has only had a few years in order to prove himself. Some could argue that maybe with more, refining, he could become a decent driver. Do you think Williams are ever going to, or how long do you think it will be until Williams gives up the ghost on yet another failed pay driver?
Well, I mean, I think recently F1 has definitely been trying to get in more publicity for America. We've seen what, three races last year and this year in the United States, where I think for a fan perspective, um, it should be more global and less Americanized. I think that's what fans want. I'm not sure that's the reason why Logan Sargent still has a seat. I think there is a lot of publicity done by F1 Corporation themselves instead of the teams. And I think I'm not quite sure the reason why Williams has decided to keep Logan Sargent. I think it's because they just want to have that. I think they just have some sort of hope with him. But if you, but it looks like they haven't learnt from their lesson with the likes of Nicholas Latifi, which has brought me that confusion I was talking about before, Ben. But yeah, I think that's that's what's going on now. And in terms of the future for Logan Sargent's contract, if he doesn't perform as well as Alex Albon, I think he will be losing his seat at the end of this year, minimum. I think I'm not sure whether he can be pulled out of his seat according to the contract. We've seen that with in the Red Bull family, but I'm not quite sure how it works in Williams, and I'm not really sure who would replace him at the moment if that was a possibility.
Yeah, I think it would be a difficult one. I don't think, I floated the idea of Zane Maloney last time we talked, possibly for a seat in Formula One. I don't know if anybody in F2 right now, maybe other than Teo Porcher, really can take up the mantle of Formula One driver. I don't know if they're, mature enough both in mentality and in driving style. Um, but obviously Logan Sargent is creating more problems than he's solving at Williams. But on the other side of things, you have Alex Albon who's been a bit of a tough nut to crack so far this year. I mean, two P11s for sure. But one of those was off the back of a Pierre Gasly penalty, that one, P11 in Australia. So he's been close to or near enough to the points. But last year, one of the things that really impressed me with Alex and is why I predicted around the start of the season that he could be moving up into the Mercedes seat, um, is that, he just has this ability to grasp opportunities that so many other F1 drivers don't take. And so far, he's sort of been lacking in that front. What do you think it is that's changed for him, if anything? And why has there been such a disparity between his performances this year and his confidence in the FW 45 of last year?
Well, I think um, Alex Albon's performance last year was above and beyond. It was uh, definitely carrying the Williams team. For the machinery that he was given, I think he definitely outperformed his expectations and he showed other teams what he was capable of. I think when we were talking about in the last episode, one of the most recent episodes about 2025 predictions, I think I put Alex Albon in one of the top teams because teams should be looking at him based on his 2023 seasons. As of this year, I think I'm not going to say I'm disappointed with his performance. I'm gonna blame it on being unlucky because of certain incidents. You can say that his crashes or his crash incident could have been his fault, but at the same time, there have been numerous occasions this early stage of the season where Alex Albon has the ability to score points, but he's being held back by the machinery that he's been put in. I think this Williams car isn't as good this year than it is last year. I'm not quite sure why, but I think maybe because all of the other teams around that marker zone has sort of improved a bit more over the winter. I'd really like to see Alex Albon succeed this year, especially coming off the back of last year. And I really hope that Williams do find some research and development over the next few races and they can come back fighting stronger than they were last year.
Yeah, they've been on a bit of a downward spiral, I think, these past few years. Or sorry, this the start of this year, where it's sort of gone from, decent sort of moving forwards, and I think they might have taken a step back here, an impromptu step back. And I think that's the last thing that Williams need really, just to have both of their drivers kind of, you know, I think Logan Sargent definitely disappointing, needless to say. But, Alex Albon sort of now on the cusp of disappointing. 0 points from 4 races. It's a difficult one to it's a difficult one to again put blame on Alex because he's brought Williams so much success. I mean, comparative success that is. Um, Certainly not success compared to the days of old, but comparative success nonetheless. Um, and so, it's difficult to put it all on him, but I think maybe, maybe a 2-year contract or maybe a multi-year contract is in a similar way to some other drivers on the grid, like Valtteri Bottas, for example. Perhaps like a multi-year contract isn't particularly good for him because now it puts him in a sort of sense of security that he, has previously not been able to afford, and maybe that's made him slightly more, slightly less likely to um put his foot on the gas and try as hard as he can every single Grand Prix. Not to say that Alex isn't trying hard, but maybe he's been given, the opportunity to relax a bit because he knows he's comfortable in that Williams seat. And perhaps that means that his performances are sort of following a similar pattern. But I don't think it's right to assume in that is always necessarily the case. But switching over to somebody who I do think has got a bit too secure for his own good, Daniel Ricciardo, the other driver in that incident that ripped apart the turn three tire barrier in a pretty dramatic fashion. Um, he's really disappointed this season in my books. I think he's just been off the pace compared to Yuki. I think he's been certainly not what Red Bull, certainly not what um, the RBs, formerly AlphaTauri, were expecting. And how much do you think his seat is also perhaps in jeopardy in the same way that his teammate Nick De Vries's was last year? And what do you think Daniel needs to do in order to possibly regain some hope at the RB's Racing Bulls, Visa Cash App, etc., etc.?
Well, I think this is a very interesting topic. I think Daniel Ricciardo is definitely a loved driver in the sport of F1, but in recent years, his performance has been on a decline. I'd like to say there's a reason he didn't have a seat for the beginning of 2023, and unfortunately,